This show is sponsored by you. Stick around till after the news to hear more about that. This is Cup of Go for March 22nd, 2024. Keep up to date with the important happenings in the Go community in about 15 minutes per week. I'm Jonathan Hall.
And I'm Shai Ahmad. Quick, what's today's date?
Declined.
All right, we have a themed episode for y'all today where we are going to mostly focus on declined proposals. Shout out to Tom from Oka. Oh, that's funny. The previous listener from my workplace was also Tom. It's a different Tom. So a new Tom. Tom from Oka, shift left, who said he liked the declined proposals. So we decided to do a themed episode just for you.
Yeah, there we go.
But we have a few items to get through first.
Yeah. So on the topic of declines, call for papers is open now for GoLab 2024.
That's so optimistic. On the topic of working hard, submitting a call for papers and getting it declined with no review, the call for papers is open.
Yeah. Some of you may remember GoLab happened in Florence, Italy this last year. It's happening again. If you want to be like me and have your CFP declined, be sure to submit it before the deadline, which is May 1st.
So, like always, we encourage you to work on a talk, on a call for papers and hand it in. It doesn't take a lot of work, but it's really like if you get into a conference or a meetup, usually pans out good for everyone because there's more Go content out there for everybody to learn. And for you personally, it's good like for your career and whatever. On that topic, I did a meetup talk a week and a half ago, and it should be up on YouTube like this weekend. So if it comes out before the episode comes out, we might put it in the show notes. But it's Hebrew only, so sorry.
So if you don't speak Hebrew, declined.
Yeah, declined. Computer says no.
Speaking of people who say no, Brian Mills has recently announced that he's leaving or has left the Go team. So I guess he declined to go. I don't know how we want to frame that. But anyway, thanks, Brian, for all your help with the Go over the years. It's not that we are spying on the Go team, but this is a Go news podcast, so it's relevant to announce when one of them team members leaves. I don't know who, if anybody, will be replacing him, or if we would even know that information, because it's not like...
Yeah, the Go team is still at like Google. But thanks, so much for all your work over the years. What you would say is the highlight of Brian's contributions, other than, being a part of the team and sort of maintaining the language?
I mostly know Brian through his thoughtful comments on issues that I track, or when I'm preparing for the show. BC Mills, I think, is his GitHub handle. So, he pipes in a lot with useful comments, as does the entire Go team, to my knowledge. I've never met any one of them who I don't think are being helpful or constructive in the way they provide feedback. So
thanks a lot, Brian, for helping decline so many issues. On that topic,
would you tell us how it feels to be declined?
My proposal got declined yet again. Longtime listeners know that whenever a discussion picks up on the channel where people are like, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that, and we're all sort of complaining about a thing. If I agree with it, I like opening up a ticket, opening up a proposal. I did it once for YAML, where I wanted YAML files to be part of the standard library, same as JSON. That got declined on the basis that YAML doesn't really have a spec. So putting it in the Go stdlib is kind of bad. And also, there's a third-party library that does it really well and people really like, which is YAML.v3. So no real reason to put in the stdlib, with a really thoughtful comment from Russ, in the same vein of comments that you talked about. So in one of our latest episodes, we talked about a new time format that someone suggested. Can you say it out loud without opening the notes?
No.
Nobody can, because it's 151, whatever, a bunch of random numbers that actually mean the Unix timestamp. And that sort of speaks to how we do time formatting in the Go standard library. For those who aren't familiar, you have a time.parse function that gets a string. That's the thing you want to parse as the second argument. But the first argument is a layout. Now, what's different about that layout than other languages that you would normally use?
It uses a reference date of January 2nd, 2006. I don't remember the exact specification, but it's a reference date. And so you basically just write that date in the format you want, and then it magically interprets that to be the format, rather than doing like MMDD, YYYY, whatever.
Yeah. And the usual, I guess I don't want to say standard because there isn't really a standard, but I did a comparison to other languages because suddenly when I thought about it, I was surprised. We put that proposal we talked about that proposal on the show, right? Of adding Unix time, which looked really funny. And everybody on the channel chimed in and were like, this would make me dislike Go's time parse even more. And a whole bunch of people piled on because it's fun to complain about that function because it is kind of weird.
Yeah.
So I opened a proposal. I compared to Python, where you have datetime. I compared to JavaScript, where you have looks-on and from format explain. I compared to Java, like datetime formatter runs on every enterprise machine in the world. Probably can be wrong. And even a new-ish language like Rust's strf time in their chrono format crate. And I wrote what we should do in Go. I tried to find like previous work and give some context as well. Just got declined as a duplicate because closed issues. This was discussed in the past, closed in the past. And basically the Go team decided that they're not going to relitigate an issue without significant new information. And there isn't really significant new information. Like a bunch of devs rediscovering the time.parse is kind of funny looking, is not really new information. At first, I was kind of disappointed. Felt like I put in some work into it and I was like, oh, why not? But then, with the explanation that Go has a single way to do things and it doesn't want to support two ways to do the same thing, I was pretty pleased about it. Like after 30 minutes, I cooled down and I think it was the correct-ish decision, even though we don't have like a standard-ish library like YAML.v3. How do you think the closing of the issue went? Like, do you agree with it or are you kind of...
Ultimately, I do agree with the closing of the issue. I also disagree with the original design. But I don't think the original design is bad enough to warrant making things more confusing.
Yeah. I wish I were in the room where it happened when they decided so I could like stop them.
But no one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened.
If I could change one small thing about it, I would make them use like ISO 3339 date instead of a US standard date because that makes sense to everybody, but that's really a minor thing.
So my proposal get declined yet again. I don't know if that's really news. It's like a dog bit a person. It's the expected way of the world, I guess. But there are some other declined proposals.
Yeah, we have a few others. So this is an interesting one. Things like this have come up a few times. This one got some new attention. It was proposed on December 20th, and so it's fairly recent. The proposal was to add support for explicit conversion from Boolean to integer types. So if you write int, parend, and then a bool value is true or false, close parend, it would convert it to either a 0 or a 1. That was the proposal. And it has a lot of sort of supporting evidence that this is something needed. A lot of people have commented that they wish the language did this. I have wished for this sometimes. Of course, it is possible to do the conversion, but it's like 4 lines of code to do that right now, right? You have to create var I int. If the Boolean value, then I equals 1, and then close parens. That's 4 lines of code to get what could be turned into just a simple type conversion. In theory. Ultimately, it was declined.
Yeah, it was declined. This is another like restart of an issue. This was something that was proposed for Go 1.5, but Alan Donovan, who suggested this, he brings the evidence when he talks about issues. We're going to talk about another one of his proposals in just a few minutes, but the one thing I really like is that he writes analyzers that look up specific cases, that he proposes. So it's not just like, oh, I think it's going to look cool. It's also like, look at all these places in the language where people solved it differently. We would use my proposals for this, for this issue in various, packages in the Go mod mirror. So that's really cool. Like bringing in the evidence, both from Go mod and also from the standard library, I think makes the discussion a lot more interesting because you can see the real life examples. And you can see, in the standard library, when you do time format, if we're already talking about it, there's a place where you do int of u equals 0, and you put it in a variable called n. Like whatever that means, it would have been replaced by just like u, right? Mm-hmm. So u equals 0.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thought, at least. But it's not super difficult to implement. Like it replaces basically a var and an if. So it is in the realm of syntactic sugar, at least for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it got declined after a lot of discussions. And I think people aren't happy with the decline because the decline has like 11 downvotes and some sad faces.
Yeah, so I think this is an example where the Go team is kind of in a tough spot because you get a popular request like this, but they want to decline it because it's not solving a really serious problem. It's solving a slight annoyance. It's not solving a really serious problem. So is it really worth the effort of introducing another way to do something in Go? Ensuring that it doesn't break any code. I don't know how it would, but maybe it could. But you need to be very careful when you're doing this sort of stuff. So I understand why the Go team sort of biases toward not changing, even in a popular thing like this. But it puts them in a tough spot because now they have to make the unpopular decision to not do something that is popular. And it's a judgment call that, I don't know how I would do it better.
And people, by the way, said that, where they're surprised by the, change in consensus. And I think people don't realize that consensus doesn't mean a consensus in the GitHub issues, like upvotes and what do people say. I think it's consensus in the review board where people actually sit and talk about the issues, sort of an architectural overview board that has all the context, has all the history, and ultimately holds the decisions. But, there is one very interesting comment, if we're already talking about declined proposals, from NDG that says basically, given that, every change becomes more difficult and the bar gets raised every version, right? Because you have to worry about more things. The language is getting more and more complicated as time goes on and as we're adding things to it. Overall, like there were changes that simplified the language, but overall, I think as a trend, we're adding more and more stuff to the language, right? Now you add into Boolean, you got to make sure, the performance tracer that we talked about 2 weeks ago still works when you do the release. Like you have more things to worry about. So Andy says that he would love a way to weigh in prioritizing changes instead of like more than just commenting on GitHub and saying like plus or minus. I'm wondering how much that resonates with you because users usually don't know what they want. We've been developing software long enough to know that. But I don't know, maybe language community members affecting the 33% of the priority in like popular votes or something like that. I have something similar at work where I have a developer survey and that, directly impacts what I do because I do engineering effectiveness. Like I ask the developers, would you rather I work on ease of release or would you rather I work on documentation quality? And even if I think that X is better, if, all of them vote Y, then I'm going to work on Y because you have to make people also use the solution you're developing, not just develop the best solution you can.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's room for more influence from the public and maybe even just like more attention. Like I think it's easy for issues. I have a proposal that I think is perfectly acceptable. I don't see any objections to it. And it's just sitting there. It hasn't really, it got attention when I first published it. It just sits there. I wish that these things would get attention. If you're going to decline it, fine, but at least decline it. I don't even get that respect. You got yours declined.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's just sitting there rotting. So, and I understand that they're busy. I'm not trying to pick on anybody here. But I think I've said this before, if not on this show in another venue. I wish that there was more of a community liaison or something on the Go team who would help. If they can't improve the way they're doing this, at least to communicate why, let us understand, and, just be that liaison for us and help us understand what you expect from the community as the Go team and how we can interact effectively.
Although I do think, just to be fair and round it out, that this balance is okay. I mean, it can be better, but it's good.
It could be a lot worse too.
The main priorities are not making the community happy. The main priorities are making sure the language is stable. A new version comes out every 6 months, making sure it's secure. You don't hear anybody complaining about, the patches are coming out too slow for security updates because they're super on top of that. So, I do think they have their priorities straight. I guess wishing for more capacity in the Go team in case Sundar is listening to this podcast, maybe throw $2 extra billion a year towards the Go team. I don't know. I don't think Gemini is doing that well. Maybe you can divert some funds.
So before we finish at this topic, I want to mention one comment that Russ Cox made that I like. It's not really relevant to the topic. He said, but it's an interesting comment. He says, I am sure approximately nothing uses complex types. If Go didn't have them today, I think we would decline adding them pretty quickly. It's fun to hear that from somebody who I know, as part of his day job, investigates public uses of Go features And if he's the one telling us that approximately nothing uses complex, that inspires me to not add complex support to any tools I'm ever creating for Go.
Totally. Wait, what does he mean when he say complex types?
Complex 64 and complex 128. Imaginary numbers. Yeah.
Well, if you got to that point, you're on your own. So another proposal we want to discuss, it's currently active, so you can influence its future, but I do think it might get declined based on Russ's comments, just because it doesn't seem worthwhile. But it is interesting. It's simple enough to actually say the code out in audio form, which is rare for us. So it's a new function, right? So func. The function is called is, and it gets one parameter, x, of type any, right? So it's a generic function. You can pass any type of parameter. Returns true or false. Returns true if the type assertion would succeed, and false if it doesn't. So you basically can use it, if you want to make sure a thing is of a type Y, right? So you call is square brackets, int, and then you pass in a string, it would say false. You pass in an int, it would say true.
Right.
So it's sort of about generics indirectly. There are a lot of examples in other languages. This proposal is by Alan Donovan, who we already mentioned. So like he usually does, he put the analyzer here with all the examples where this is relevant, and 2.5% of modules on GoMod define a function that is basically is. So, you have to rewrite it for almost everything, which is, I think it's a very compelling argument, right? Many of them are related to errors. You check if something is of type specific error, and then you handle that specific error differently than, just a generic let's panic or something.
And to be clear, if anybody's not obvious to everybody, you can do this right now, but it's more verbose and cumbersome. So if you do underscore, comma, okay, colon, then your variable dot and a type assertion, that okay that's returned is true or false. That's the same value we're looking for, just a more concise way to do it that doesn't require 2 lines of code, that you could put 3 of them together in an if statement without being awkward and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the problem right now is that you can't use it in expressions in the middle of an expression, because you have to, if you want to do if something and x is of type Y, there's no way to write that out in a single line. Which, saying it out loud sounds kind of funny. There's no way to do x is of type Y, is x of type Y. There's no way to do that.
Yeah.
So if you have a lot of code that uses some types, or you have some code that analyzes Go code and you want to do assertions on types, if you develop a linter that checks for specific types or whatever, you're probably gonna want to chime in, because this proposal, I think, is on its way out. I like it. It's simple. I wouldn't think twice if I saw it in code. I would just read it and I was like, I understand completely what this does, which for me clears the bar enough to do it. But I wouldn't add a third-party library for that support, right? Yeah. If I needed to implement it, I would implement it myself, 2.5% of the packages in GoMod Mirror. But I think the Go team's attitude towards this proposal is, while it's true, X, okay, doing the okay type assertion just gives you the value you need to use, and that's okay. Because that's usually the case you want to do. You don't want to just do the type assertion. You also want to use the thing as the new type. So that's sort of where they are. Is wouldn't give you the new type. It would just give you the true and false part.
So I have 2 issues, maybe 3 issues with this proposal. I agree that it's trying to solve a problem that I want to have solved. I don't know if I agree with the way to solve it. So first, I think this problem is broader than type assertions. We have the same construct where you do underscore, comma, okay, colon equals when doing certain map lookups, when reading from a channel, and so on. I would like to see a solution that solves all of those in the same way. If all I want to see is, did I get a value from this channel? Is wouldn't work for that, but I feel like it's solving the same problem. So I'd like to see a solution that works on all 3 of those cases. Maybe there's others too. I'm not sure. And then the other is one of the comments I thought was interesting. When we're doing built-in functions, we aren't strictly tied to the function signatures that we are in other cases. We have make and new are great examples. They're built-in functions, and they take types as arguments, like type names, which you can't do to regular functions. Why not do the same thing here? If we're going to have an is function, just make it take 2 arguments. The first is the name of the type, and the second is the variable, or vice versa. So is X int, why not do that rather than making it a syntactically generic function? So those are my two complaints mainly about this. They aren't really compatible with each other. But I would love to see a solution. I don't know what the solution is, but I feel like it should be like, I don't know, an alternative to the blank identifier that turns it to return an expression that returns two values into one that only returns one, like completely ignore the first value or something like that. I don't know.
I definitely wrote this function like twice in my life already. I wasn't like, I wrote it in a single file where I used it. It wasn't like, oh, in my normal utils, that's always what I put in the same way that, okay, new Go project, need to go lang CI find the golden config file, set up the earth file. You go through that rigmarole the first 15 minutes where you set up the thing. Wait, what's the GitHub address? Is it github.com? Is it https github.com? How do you set that up, et cetera, et cetera? It's not part of that. Like, it's not part of the boilerplate of every new project. It's kind of a localized feature. So if the bar is indeed high, as we're learning on this episode, it's okay that this will get rejected. But if you have a lot of use for is, then it would be a good place to chime in. I can imagine in code generators, by the way, would be a huge deal, right? Because you want to generate code, but you don't really care about the underlying value. If this is int, then I want to generate like a Go function that gets int or something like that. I don't know.
I'm working on a project exactly like that, and I'm running into that essentially the same problem. Yes.
So maybe you can go comment that and upvote. But if you don't like that API, so maybe don't.
Well, yeah, I think it's like I said. I think it's a problem that should be solved. I don't know if I like that particular solution.
Let's talk about one more declined proposal. This one, an easy one that I'm very happy that it got declined.
So we're all excited about the new range over func that's coming through, or maybe some of us aren't. We've talked about that on the show before too, but it's coming probably in Go 1.23. It's already available as an experiment. If you enable Go experiment equals range func, you can already play with it. So somebody observed that you can range over a nil slice or a nil map or a nil channel without a problem, and it just treats them as empty. But as soon as you try to range over a nil func, you get a panic. So the proposal was to make a nil func with this new range over func act as though it were an empty set to iterate over. That was the proposal, and it ultimately got declined. And you think that's a good thing. Why?
Because it says the word for when you do for range over an iterator, but it's just syntactic sugar over a function. And calling a nil function panics. It's more consistent. Laying it out like that is unfair. You're pretty like, for range slice, doesn't panic. For range iter, does panic. Doesn't that seem weird? But a slice is not a function. It's a pointer to a container type, right? Like that has 0 or more elements, and very predictably you iterate over the for body 0 or more time. It's super consistent to everything you know, and it's also very natural. Trying to call a nil function, you should definitely check that the function is not nil before you call it, right? The way you get this iterator, right? The way you fill it in is very different from the way you fill in the slice. You know what I mean? You would need to have someone give you a nil iterator to get that. And that's going to be kind of rare because you wouldn't be able to pass it in. Like it would fail higher up the stack. It's going to be a very rare case of like converting types from any without any like type safety checking to get to that situation, I think.
I agree with you.
Nil iterators are just a mistake. I would assume that someone can find a way to write a linter that even detects that, right? Where if you get
in some cases,
an iterator and it's not 100% certain from the types that it's not going to be nil, then it's going to like lint you. Like I think this is something we can do even in Go vet. So I'm happy that it's going to panic. Like write your test, it's going to panic, and then you're going to figure it out and be like, oh, I made a big mistake here. I shouldn't iterate over this nil value.
And honestly, from a debugging standpoint, I would rather it panic than behave as though it were empty, because I'm more likely to detect my bug that way.
Yeah, you would put like a breakpoint in the iterator and you would be like, oh no, why am I not iterating? Am I not producing the messages into that function or whatever? I think it's more consistent. But it's still a worthwhile proposal. It's an interesting discussion, just with a clear-cut conclusion. So thanks, Tamayaka from Japan, from opening this issue. And thank you, Go team, for declining it.
Let's talk about one final thing that's not declined, and that is our upcoming interview.
Woohoo! If you're into terminals, like me, and you like playing around with your terminal and terminal configuration, you're going to love this. We're talking about Elvish, the 100% Go in terminal, and also like shell scripting language.
The one shall to rule them all.
Yeah. Speak, go, and enter. They should put that on
There it is. There it is.
That's coming up right after this break.
Stick around.
This show is supported by you. Thanks a lot to all our new and existing Patreon members. We want to shout out the new members that joined this week. Rob Prentice and Charlie TC. Thanks a lot for joining.
Yay.
And helping us maintain this kind of expensive hobby that we really, really enjoy doing. The money doesn't, like, we're not planning to get rich off this. We're just paying for like equipment and mostly editing fees and stuff like that. Shout out to our amazing editor. Where can you reach us? You can reach us at cupago.dev. You can reach us at the Gopher Slack, #cupago with dashes, so like kebab case. You can email us at news@cupago.dev, that is news@cupago.dev. You can also buy swag at store.cupago.dev. Basically, find all the links on cupago.dev, including all past episodes. Before we jump into the rest of the break, I want to tell you about this week's sponsor, boldlygo.tech. So if you're listening to the show, you're probably running some Go code in production. And if you haven't heard all about boldlygo.tech, you might be already running their code in production.
What?
Yeah, that's kind of a bold claim.
How's that possible?
Well, they've contributed to many popular open source projects, including Logrus, the Go language itself, Echo, Sentry, CouchDB, and others.
Wow.
This is Jonathan. Jonathan's looking at me.
This is me.
Like looking for when I'm going to tell the people that. So yeah, Jonathan's available for consultation. He can help you build your projects for you with implementation. He can help you debug broken behavior that's just got you stumped. He can do code review and auditing and even architectural reviews and guidance. His code has been trusted by companies that Canonical, Unity, Deliveroo, Booking.com. You can do a lot worse. So you can reach out to Jonathan at boldlygo.tech/subscription. Link is in the show notes. Thank you for your sponsorship.
Hey, no problem. And thanks for the kind plug.
For sure. So other than our Patreons and the sponsor, we want to nerd out about two things. One, we want to ask you to leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcast and sort of share the show. We've been getting really, really good responses on the show lately. A lot of interesting discussions. People reaching out to me in meetups and being like, "Hey, I know you from the podcast," which is new, at least for me. Mm-hmm. And we want to nerd out about analytics a little bit. We tend not to do this too often, but we recently crossed a really exciting milestone. So we recently crossed 50,000 downloads on our episodes, which is a really big milestone. It's more than the population of the Northern Mariana Islands, but slightly less than the Faroe Islands that belong to Denmark. But you go to the list of countries in the world and you have like Vatican City, right? Where there are like 500 people. We're way above that in the list of countries, which is amazing. It's just mind-blowing to me, and we really appreciate all your support, especially considering that we've talked about this in the past, but download numbers are not really reflective of listening numbers. Right. So I think it might be even more people that actually we reached out and maybe even helped, and educated a little bit. So that's been great. We've really appreciated all your support over the last, year and a few months.
Yeah. And I think it also deserves a shout out. February was our record-breaking month. We had 5,503 downloads in February, which beat our previous record by about 10%. So we're on an upward trend, I guess.
Yeah, really cool. And I know people like to nerd out about that as well in the top countries. So US is still firmly on top, but second place is Germany, and they outrun the UK, which used to be our second topmost listening country. And Israel's up there as well, like place 8 or 9.
Netherlands is just barely beating out Israel by 0.2%.
Yeah. And also a lot of listeners from India. So shout out to our 2% of listeners from India. Yeah. And that we just wanted to say thank you for all the support and share, share our enthusiasm with you. So thanks a lot.
I think that's it. Stick around for Elvish.
So, John, did you check out my new tattoo?
I love it, yeah.
Do you know where it's from?
I don't.
What does it look like? It kind of looks like something from Lord of the Rings, maybe.
So I wish there was someone here who spoke Elvish who could help you with it. Oh, hi, Chi.
Hi. I know
How you
Elvish,
doing?
although it may not be the Elvish that you're looking for, though.
At this point, Jonathan will take anything he can get. So how about you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
My name's Chi. I'm a software engineer, and
Nice.
I
Good
use
start.
Go. And among other things, I develop a shell and a programming language. It's one thing, not two things. It's called Elvish, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. I'm really glad to be here.
We're glad to have you, man. So, all of us developed our own shell and programming languages every Monday and Thursday. So nothing special there, but what's special about Elvish?
What is special about Elvish is that I think it has there's nothing like super new about Elvish. I try to stick to like Rust's kind of old mantra that it only uses things that are actually well researched. That's where the name Rust comes from. But I actually try to stick to it. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build kind of a modern scripting language and build it with a very super nice interactive features and also make it a shell programming language, which I think it is a combination that is not very common, at least not very common when I started Elvish. I started Elvish, I think, 10 years ago. And at that time, like when you use shell, people just think like Bash or maybe this Chinese shell ZSH from 1991. Or some people use Fish. But at that time, I felt like not all of them have very modern scripting languages. It's a little bit different today, but that's when I started. It was kind of like that. It was kind of a unique combination of a good interactive shell and a modern scripting language.
Cool. Did it come like out of obviously not everybody is developing their own languages all the time. It's something very unique to do.
That's surprising.
Yeah. Maybe because it's hard. But, did it come out of a need? Were you like frustrated with the Z shell and Fish?
So let me tell you a bit of my backstory there. So I think it was the last year of my uni. So I became kind of a command line enthusiast, I think. So I was in a computer science adjacent major. So I did all my assignments on the Linux command line, even those that I probably shouldn't have done, like CAD stuff. And I was also doing some system admin work for the local open source software mirror site. The things you get, like things like you get your APT package from, like if you use Debian, or RPM package if you use Fedora. So I used shell quite heavily, both kind of interactively in my workflow, but also using scripting because of the system administration work. You need to like periodically synchronize your mirror site from your upstream. Like for instance, for Debian, you will go to the actual official Debian download site and synchronize all the APT packages from it. So there were kind of two things, among others, that kind of made me want to write my own shell. The first thing was I was using Zesh at that time, and I tried to implement an interactive directory history in Zesh. And I thought, this shouldn't be hard because this language is like super powerful and you do all sorts of stuff with it, like having implementing Tetris in the terminal with Zesh. So I tried to do that, and I made the mistake of opening up Zesh's user menu, and I saw all this very, like, it has like 20 different operators for the different string operations, all with like either symbols or like single letter names. And I felt really overwhelmed at that point, and I closed it in a panic.
That's funny. I've opened, like, I'm using Zesh. That's my daily driver. Jonathan, what's yours? Probably Bash, right?
I usually use Bash, yeah.
I never opened the user manual. Like, I never went that way. Oh, it looks
I think
old.
I think nowadays there probably isn't such a need because with things like Oh My Zesh, like if you want to do something more interesting in Zesh, that probably somebody has already gone to the trouble of reading the user manual and written a plugin for it. But at that time, I was trying to implement kind of my own fancy interactive features. Right. And another thing was back to the open source mirror side. So I was debugging. So we hacked up some shell scripts to kind of periodically synchronize all the like packages. And I thought it was just really hard to do anything slightly more complex with it. And I thought it must have been just that I really sucked at this language. And somebody came along and they told me, I found this very well written, very well maintained script from Debian, and it's called FTP Sync. And he showed me, you must use this. It's very nice. And I opened up that script and I I realized it was not my fault. It was the shell's fault. Like you just can't write very clean script with the traditional shell features. So those were kind of two things among other experience. Like I think those are the two most typical experience I can still recall. And I felt that shell is really kind of underpowered. And at the same time, I was also quite interested in things like programming languages. And so I picked up a copy of APUE, Advanced Programming in the Unix Environment. And at the same time, there's a new language from some of the original developers of Unix that came out. You will be surprised to know what it is. It's called Go. So Go just came out at some point. I think when I first started developing Elvish, I was using Go 1.1. So not exactly the day Go was released, but like a few months after that.
It's interesting that, the new language came out and almost inevitably, like there was a shell in it. There was everybody just re-implemented the things that they care about in that new language. But other than the fact that it's, formally Unix guys, which is like for your specific application is very relevant. But other than that, why Go? I mean, most shells are written in C, right?
Most shells were written in C. I actually started trying to implement Elvish in C, and I kind of just gave up after a few days. I thought I need a more modern language. Like things like it's very hard to actually properly modularize your C code. You have to have all those, like you have to do manual namespacing. You have to come up with a unique prefix for all your functions and stick to it all the time. That was quite painful. Also, like cross-compiling C was also quite painful. So that was why Go really appealed to me when it first came out. And I found more reasons to actually use Go along the way. We can talk about that now.
Sure, go ahead. What features are like the main ones in Elvish? Because it's not an HTTP backend server for like 80% of the listeners, this is totally new ground.
Yeah, it's not an HTTP backend server. It is a shell. And Go is actually quite relevant because several reasons. First, Go is actually reasonably fast. It wasn't actually super fast when it first came out, but it was already kind of fast enough for my purposes. It had a much quicker startup speed than Java, and in general, its performance is much better than things like Python, Ruby. And if you think about 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of players in that niche, really. Nowadays, you have things like Rust, Zig, and all those kind of newcomer languages that aim to replace C and C++. But really 10 years ago, if you ask somebody, what's a much better version of C? Like Go was a pretty reasonable answer. And I found more reasons to use Go. So for instance, Go code turned out to be quite readable. And I kind of knew this at the beginning because I kind of trusted the taste of the people who were involved in the original Unix. And I'm vaguely familiar with some of their work, like Plan 9. And I think before Go, Rob Pike also worked on several programming languages. I think one of them is not called Limbo, but there's an operating system called Limbo, and it has a corresponding programming language. And I think I kind of like their taste. So I think this is probably a language that I will also like. And also, eventually I discovered Go had great tooling. Like Go FMT, when it first came out, it was actually quite new. Like there were things like formatters was not new, right? But like saying that the language has one formatter that everybody uses, it was quite new. So I didn't have to worry about how to which like indentation style, which brace style my program should use. So it was pretty nice. And also nowadays you have Go PLS, but before that there was another program called Go Code that makes very easy to get like IDE-like experience in editors like Vim. So that was pretty nice.
Oh, you use Vim as an editor?
Yeah, I used Vim as
I figured you'd write your own.
No, I have not yet.
Yes.
I just can imagine like two listeners right now dropping their phone and running to Slack and be like, dude, let's write the next Vim and Go.
I think but on a more serious note, I think the market of editors is quite saturated these days. And I use VS Code most of the time.
Me too. No shame. You turn on a Vim mode and you're just as hardcore as people who spend 45 minutes configuring their like NeoVim configuration files every day. but you just get more stuff done. I just convinced one of my team members, we're sitting there, he's fighting against his Neo Vim config, and I'm like, dude, just open VS Code, let's get to work. Anyway, editor fights aside. It's not that show.
Emacs all the way.
I can't believe.
Okay, I want to talk about Elvish some more instead of editors. I'm curious, as a scripting language, how does it compare? How is it better? How is it maybe more limited than, let's just use Bash or POSIX, since that's what everybody is familiar with?
So I think when it comes to scripting, I think there are essentially two aspects I think that makes it better than more traditional shells. The first aspect is that it's actually quite clean. So if you kind of need a degree to write and correct shell scripts, right? You need to remember to always quote your variables with double quotes. Otherwise, like white spaces and wildcards in the variables will do weird things when you run it. And you need to know how to do error handling properly. There are a lot of articles you can find on the internet. Some telling you that you should always use set-e, and for Bash, there's also taking something called pipe status, something like that. But none of them actually kind of work 100% of the time. So you have to be very careful to handle errors correctly. And Elvish kind of doesn't have those problems. So for instance, every variable in Elvish would just expand to a single value. You wouldn't do all those shenanigans behind your back. And error handling, Elvish takes this kind of succeed or die approach to error handling. A lot of things just become exceptions. Like if you call an external command and exists with non-zero, that's an exception. If you don't catch the exception, it just crashes your entire script, which I think is actually desirable behavior for a lot of usage scenarios that you will use shell in, because when you write a shell script, we kind of expect it to follow a predefined script, right? Because it's called a script. And if anything goes wrong, the correct behavior is to stop and not proceed. So this is one aspect where I think it's just a much cleaner language. Another aspect is that I made Elvish basically on par with like modern scripting languages. So things it has, for instance, some things it has is like nested data structures. In Bash or Zesh, you can have strings, you can have arrays of strings, you can have maps of strings, and that's it. You can't have an array of strings, and you can't have a map of where the value is a list of strings, so things like that. But Elvish doesn't have those restrictions. It just like takes kind of like a common sense approach if you are designing a new dynamic programming language. It also has first class functions, which is more useful than you might think, because my favorite example is when you're customizing your prompt in Bash, what you do is that you learn all those escape codes with percentage something like, for instance, %h is host, %u is user. I think like there are many reasons why it works this way, but I think the fundamental reason is that Bash doesn't have first class functions, because in Elvish, the way you customize your code is you define a function, and that becomes your prompt. And you assign this function to a variable called edit:prompt, and that's a prompt. And the way you do install completion scripts in Elvish is that there is a map from the command name to a function. And so, for instance, if you're writing a new completion script for Git, what you do is that you would assign the Git element of this map to a function that takes your existing command line and outputs what you want to complete. Whereas if you look at, for instance, the command completion API of Bash and Zesh, there's a lot of it involves multiple commands. It has a lot of flags. And I think all of this is to make up for the fact that they don't have things like first class functions and nested data structure, because completers can get quite complicated.
I want to shout out a specific feature, exceptions. And the reason I want to shout it out is it's not especially, like it doesn't stand out especially in the documentation, but it stands out to me personally. I'm going to put myself out here. I had a really shitty bug with a Bash script last week where our CI/CD pipeline is in Bash, like mostly Bash scripts in GitHub Actions. And there was a command like run the tests and then error code equals the error code of the tests, right? Which is how you carry over errors, like, and then do some error handling and then pipe the error out in normal shell scripting. In Elvish, if I understand correctly, it would have been an exception, right? And I had to do like try catch if I wanted to explicitly do stuff.
Exactly.
That would have been great news to me last week because this week I just used shell And then I accidentally shoved another command in between the tests and the error code capture. And then suddenly all our pipelines were super green and everybody was happy. And for like 24 hours, we didn't actually run the tests. Like we ran it's even worse. We ran the tests, we spent the time, and then GitHub was always green. So there are a ton of great features here in the scripting language, but that one stands out to me right now like very bright. I'm like, where were you? Where were you?
I should advertise this more loudly, I think, especially for people writing CI/CD scripts. Also, that's actually very relevant because just a few weeks ago, I converted the majority of the shell scripts used in Elvish's own CI/CD pipeline to use Elvish itself. And it was a very nice experience. And in my old shell script, I had a lot of caveats saying that, I didn't bother making this shell script like white space correct. So make sure you don't have any white spaces in your file names. And also, this error rule should probably be handled correctly. I have a bunch of comments littered around my shell script like that. But with Elvish, the shape of the script is mostly the same. It didn't use a lot of fancy features, but just all the caveats just went away.
That leads me immediately to my next question. I think one of the reasons shell script is so, I guess the word I'm looking for is ubiquitous. It's just like everywhere, right? Is that you can assume that SH is installed on the machine you're running on.
Yeah.
Whether it's someone else's machine in your company, whether it's open source, someone just want to install something, then you can just do like curl, run this script, right? And especially in CI/CD pipelines where, they change runners, they change containers, the underlying image might get updated, whatever. But you can always rely on SH to be there. How hard it is, in your experience, to come to a group like R&D group or a company or something like that? Because what I'm imagining is a lot of our listeners right now are like, wow, this is cool. I wish I could use Elvish in my company, but obviously I can't because integrating it is going to be kind of difficult. Like you need to learn a whole new language and you need to install a lot of stuff. So I'm interested to hear, about the human aspect of like, how does integrating Elvish into an existing code base or an existing company, how does that shape out?
So I haven't like talked to a lot of people who are trying to do like integrating them into their own existing pipeline. I know I've seen in Elvish user group that some people have actually managed to integrate them into like their research projects, like data pipelines. But I to be honest, I haven't talked to a lot of people who are trying to do that, but I can tell you kind of my experience and also some of the objective facts. So I think what I would say is that it's much easier than you might think. And this is where I think a big advantage of Go comes in because cross-compilation is just trivial. We are using Go. If you go to Elvish's website, this is the first time I plug its URL. It's just elv.sh.
That's a good URL, man. It's a good domain.
Yeah. It's a domain hack I'm really proud of. And if you go to the get section, the top navbar has a get section. It generates a script for you. And it's really just a few lines of code. And you can just paste this script anywhere. And you can just start running Elvish. And I also made a GitHub action. It's called GitHub Actions action, I guess, that you can use to just use Elvish inside your GitHub action. I'm saying action too many times here. And it is super easy because of the fact that Go, you can compile things to just a single static linked binary in Go. And I use Elvish on my servers as well. What I literally do is I just SCP my local Elvish binary to my SSH host and then /user/local/thing. And then I can start using Elvish. So it is a little bit of barrier to overcome. And I would say that some people may just not bother. But for me to just not like give up and admit defeat, I think what I'm trying to do is to make Elvish as like compelling enough that people will overcome kind of this small barrier to actually start using it.
Is there? I can imagine that the answer to this is no, but I want to ask it so we can get it out there. Does Elvish try in any way to be POSIX compatible or similar enough that it feels like the same sort of thing when you're writing it, or did you just sort of start from scratch and is it a completely different experience?
That's actually a very good question. And the answer is actually not a complete no. On a surface level, the answer is no. Like Elvish, it is a non-POSIX programming language because I want to shed all the baggage that comes with like POSIX shells, right? But on the other hand, I'm trying to keep Elvish very familiar to somebody who uses POSIX shells. So one example I would point out is that I think there has been a lot of kind of new shell languages this years. And one thing Elvish does is that anything you type on the command directly is always going to be a command. I think a lot of newer shells will do things like if you type a number, it just becomes a number. It's not a command. If you quote your string, it becomes a string. And it's not a command. Elvish tries very hard to keep that kind of traditional shell feeling, if that makes any sense. And I try to not like as much as it is a non-POSIX language. I also try very hard to not use a lot of new kind of symbols, a lot of new keywords. It has to use some keywords, but I think the overall feeling, if you compare it to many other like modern shell languages, it feels more like POSIX shell. And also, that's one part of my answer. Another part of the answer is that I actually worked quite kind of briefly on a POSIX compliant, like not POSIX compliant, but kind of POSIX compatible shell. It is on my GitHub. It's on my GitHub xiaq/POSIX/sh. And my plan still is maybe I can integrate this into Elvish someday, because some people have this small snippets of vaguely POSIX shell lying around. Like maybe they copy something from the internet, and maybe they just have some old config that they don't want to bother porting to a new language. I think that is still a possibility in the future, although it's not done yet, but it's possible.
And another question from that I'm pretty sure the answer no, but I also want to put out there in a completely different direction. Elvish has a lot of work behind it. Like I look at the site. By the way, the new site looks awesome. You know, there are release notes. There's documentation. You have an awesome Elvish group. You have a Telegram group. Like it looks very serious, but I don't see the enterprise pricing button anywhere. What's up with that?
So right now, I think I'm thinking about things like building kind of a business out of this. But I think at this stage, at least probably for a few more months, I'm kind of still focusing on the technical aspects of it. And I think one distinct advantage that building a shell can have is that you can kind of get people to start using it kind of step by step. You can kind of get people to use it first as their interactive shell. Maybe they're just using this on their workstation. They're not using this in the production environment. And then they become familiar with the experience. They really like the experience. They really like the language. And they can probably gradually expand from there. So I'm not doing enterprisey things at the moment because I want to make the language work really well. I want to make people like very comfortable with it using as their daily driver first. And I think after that point is kind of more or less finished, maybe we can think about how to get this into like more serious enterprise grade business stuff.
Cool. Well, it's pretty amazing to see, you know, the pretty consistent releases, the site getting updated, the huge like module list and even themes. And it's still just a passion project. You got a lot of passion for terminals. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind sharing, I don't know if this is too personal. What theme do you use? Like Powerline, Chain, Starship?
I use Elvish default theme because it's kind of optimized for myself.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Shai, I'm curious. Have you tried Elvish yet?
I played around with it a bit, and I read the learn part. I started reading it, but I'm mostly interested in trying to like use it in my company. We're doing a lot of CI/CD pipelines, stuff like that. I recently had that bug that I just told about. Like I'm looking for a place where it would make a lot of impact because I'm super used to my terminal and all the, like I already have my dot files that I've been lugging around for like 7 years now and patching and improving. So I need a pretty convincing reason to leave my terminal. Like I imagine, maybe you beat me to it, but that with all my frustrations of the terminal, I might be better off building my own than trying another one, right? Because Elvish is probably the most ergonomic for Qi, but I don't know if it's going to be the most ergonomic for me, even though it's written in Go, so that's a big bonus.
Well, I would say, I mean, I was kind of half joking when I said it was kind of optimized for my taste. Because I think I have pretty simple taste. So Elvish default prompts, it's actually quite minimal. It just shows you working directory. And it also has a write prompt, kind of the idea stolen from Zesh.
Mm-hmm.
It just shows your username and your host. And that's kind of all I need. And it's also very simple. It's kind of, when you said it's probably easier to build your own shell. Well, I have a shell to you where it's actually kind of programmable because, for instance, the thing I mentioned earlier, like for instance, the prompt in Elvish is just a function. So you can pretty much do anything you want. You can use a lot of existing, for instance, external prompts with Elvish. But if you just have an idea of why don't I add this information to the prompt, as long as you know the command to it, you can just write your own prompt. A lot of people do that instead of using the various like external prompt like programs. It's super easy to I would say it's like right now it could be more programmable, but a lot of pieces are already quite programmable. If you're thinking about like kind of your daily experience, how the look and feel of the shell.
My experience at least was that installing it is super easy, and it had a few features that I expect from my Z shell that I had to like install plugins for and learn stuff for. The main one being a command history. I really like clicking Control R and seeing the command history like looking pretty. Because the usual, I don't know if you use, vanilla sh or vanilla bash or even vanilla zsh. When you type Control R, you get like, it says backwards search R or something like that.
Yeah.
Start typing and you don't know what you're looking for. But the command history in Elvish works a lot like, the FZF plugins, stuff like that, which I really like.
Because this is an audio program for people who don't have Elvish on their hand yet. What the kind of, it's the same key for searching history, right? But what Elvish does is that it just shows a list of, it just shows you a list of your history, like, and you can start typing and the list just narrows down to what entries match your type. And you can navigate using your arrow keys and just press enter to accept, something like that.
Yeah, and there was one thing that surprised me, and it wasn't just like, I turn on Elvish and it does something I already like. That's great. But there was something that really surprised me, and I need to see how I do it in Z shell as well. Or maybe it will be enough to convince me to move to Elvish, which is directory navigation. It's like Nerd Tree plugin in Vim. It was really cool.
You mean the
Control
file manager
N
that you can trigger with Control N, right? Yeah.
So you just press Control N and you're in like I think in Emacs it's called like file mode, Nerd Tree, where it opens the directory and you can navigate on your own. It's great. Instead of ls cd, ls cd, ls cd, it's a lot more ergonomic.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Like I spend much less time typing ls and cd after I start using Elvish as my own kind of daily driver. Because
you just spent 10 years developing a time back anytime now.
Yeah.
Well, I really like the interactive features. It's sexy. I'll have to try it for a while and see if it's enough to productivity improves. It probably will. Bash has never been a very productive tool for me. It's just the one I know. So I'm going to give it a try.
Can you imagine, John, going into one of your consultation projects? They like bring you from outside. You bring your own shell, and people are happy to see that. I'm just imagining people at work hearing like, yeah, not only I'm ragging on your Python and I'm telling you should use Go, you should use this new terminal language as well. Like I'm really trying to understand how to do the pitch, the elevator pitch.
Honestly, I have to say, for me, I'm. It sounds like you, Shai, are interested in trying to use this for CI, and I can see the benefits. But I'm more interested in trying to use it locally for personal productivity. So, I probably wouldn't want to install this in the CI pipeline for one of my clients, where I'm, a freelancer for a few months and I leave. Because then someone is going to come along and not understand it and not take the time to read the 15-minute FAQ and be like, screw this. And they're going to either not maintain the script because they don't feel like learning it, or they're going to rip it out and replace it with something worse, in Bash or something like that. So, but for personal productivity, I'm interested in trying it.
So installing on your machine.
I think the perspective from both of you is actually great. It's a great way to see like the two main use cases for Elvish these days. And and I would say it's like what I'm trying to do is try to balance kind of the development priority kind of on both fronts. But personally, I use it on both fronts. So You can count on that. It will both see like better interactive features, but it will also be an even better language to put in your CI/CD pipeline.
Well, we're about at the end of our time here. Let's one more time give everybody the link. It's elv.sh. Is there anywhere else to go, or is that the place to go for everything Elvish?
That is the place to go.
Okay.
I do want to quickly mention
Yeah.
that it's really cool. It's a really cool domain, but I don't know if you know this. It's actually a country code.
Yeah, St. Helena, right?
Yeah, I think I remember something like 35% of their GDP is domain registration.
Yeah.
It's like this tiny island with 2 crabs, 3 bungalows, and a few domain servers, and they make a lot of money.
Yeah.
I'm very happy for them. Both the SH and TV, I think it's like Tuvalu or something. Yeah, same story. And FM.
.io is the Indian Ocean Territory.
No way, really?
Yeah, of United Kingdom, I think. Also, St. Helena is also United Kingdom's overseas territory. So,
well, they do have a lot of these.
Yeah.
As a former citizen of one, here in Israel as well. So elv.sh, or you can fly over to St. Helena and try to drink the bits directly from the coconut.
If people are interested in following you personally, do you have social media presence where people can follow you? And no is a perfectly reasonable answer.
Yeah, I have a Twitter, but I'm mostly tweeting Chinese.
Okay.
I think it's kind of long overdue for me to actually make a separate account in English. But if you want to follow my Chinese Twitter right now, it's
right.
The username is xiaq. That's my normal username.
Mm-hmm.
But then you spell it backwards again, QAIX, because Twitter didn't like my short username.
Okay.
And if I have a English account, I will be sure to put that up on my current Chinese account profiles.
Well, I'm sure we have Chinese speakers listening anyway, so
yeah, sure.
they can follow you there. Great. Well, we like to round out every interview with a question. If you can remember far back to when you were learning Go, when you first got introduced to the language, was there anything surprising or challenging about the language for you that surprised you when you were learning this new language?
Yeah, so Jonathan actually asked me this before our interview starts, and I spent a very long time to come up with something that surprised me. I actually pulled out the Go language spec and digging through things that I like. And I was just going through the entire spec and I was, this is not surprising. This is not surprising. This makes sense. That makes sense. So I think, in a sense, like the 99% of Go is not very surprising. And that itself was kind of a surprising thing, because when you learn a new language, you do expect to learn like some new way to think, right?
Yeah,
Go is not really in the business of making you learn a new way to think. It kind of tries to build on your past knowledge of how to think, and then use that to build a very pretty straightforward language. However, after reading the spec for a while, I realized there was one thing that did surprise me, was the fact that Go had pointers at all, because Go is a garbage collecting language, and normally you wouldn't expect to have pointers in the garbage collecting language, but it did. So that was kind of surprising. And also, when you use pointers in receivers versus not using pointers in receivers, the semantics are a little bit confusing, because it depends. So, for instance, if you just declare a variable that's a struct, and then you can call its pointer receiver methods, even though the struct itself is not a pointer. This is because if you define a local variable, it's considered addressable, and addressable variables can just become pointers when you call a method. So there's some the concept of addressability doesn't actually appear in a lot of other places in the language spec, but it is required to understand how pointer receivers work. So that was a little bit surprising, a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I think it was. I came from C++ originally, and coming into Go, it felt simpler. But now, if you I had to give a lesson on how these operators work, I probably have to brush up on it. It's just not something I usually think about when I program Go languages. I think in much higher level, even though it does behoove me to put the ampersand in the correct place and put the asterisk in the correct place.
Though I think in retrospect, Go's approach to pointer is actually quite sensible, because in languages like Java, that just doesn't give you any control of whether a value goes onto the stack or goes onto a heap. They actually did a lot of work to make sure that to make sure that the compiler, the JVM, places the value on the heap or on the stack correctly. Whereas in Go, this gives you some control, although not total control, for when to put values on the stack.
I think it makes a lot of sense. But I agree with you that at least initially, and even right now, I'm not sure I can explain it without reading the docs first and making sure I'm correct.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Chi.
Yeah, thank you. This has been educational and inspiring. I'm going to try a new shell.
Wow. And Shay, I would really recommend you try it in your CI/CD pipeline.
I will, for sure. I just need to. The only hurdle is convincing my new team member to learn a new terminal. If Elvish documentation is good enough, then they will. And from the site, I think there's no question. It's really documented well. It's not even close to the user manual you mentioned before that I opened and immediately tapped out.
And we'd love to hear from our other listeners who try out Elvish, or maybe already have tried Elvish. Come over to our Slack channel. Let us know what you think, what your impressions are.
Yeah, send some screenshots of themes.
Oh, there we go. Cool.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing from existing users and new users.
Awesome.
Thanks, Chi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really, really happy to be on your show.